I know, okay? I know I talked about Ace Attorney fairly recently, but that was about a movie, and today I want to talk about games. After this, I'm not becoming an Ace Attorney channel, I promise. I'm not gonna start, I don't know, uploading unfunny objection.lol videos every week. Ace Attorney has seen its fair share of variants throughout its over 20-year run, through not only new entries releasing on newer hardware, but also through re-releases of previous games. The most popular version of Ace Attorney is most likely the modern re-release that's on all modern platforms, simply because of ease of access, but it is far, far from the only re-release of the original trilogy, and the series as a whole. Let's start by going back to the beginning. Ace Attorney is famous for its DS roots. Hell, I go as far as to say it's synonymous with the console. It just works so well. Having two screens to compare evidence and testimony feels perfect. The gameplay style fits perfectly for the DS and it feels made for it. But it wasn't. This is probably at least somewhat common knowledge, but Ace Attorney didn't debut on the DS. Well, yes, that's how us Yanks played it for the first time, but for Japan, it's an entirely different story. When we first got Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney on the DS in 2005, Japan first got it 4 years earlier in 2001 for the Game Boy Advance, with the next two entries being released in 2002 and 2004 respectively. Yes, that's right, the Phoenix Wright trilogy on DS is an enhanced port. I'm just gonna focus on the first game for now, but I'll briefly touch on the second and third games in a bit. The GBA version of Ace Attorney is pretty much the same as the DS version, but with different UI since we're only working with one screen instead of two, and lower quality, much more limited music. All the tracks are present here, but since the GBA sound system is a lot more limited compared to the DS's, the music sounds a lot lower quality in comparison to the re-release. Being so used to the re-releases version of this music, it's kinda bizarre hearing the older versions. The most notable difference by far is that the fifth case, Rise from the Ashes, is completely absent from this version. That case was created specifically for the DS version to take advantage of its unique hardware, such as the touchscreen, microphone, and ability to display 3D models. Some may see this as gimmicky, but I don't know, man, I think it's fun. I think the single screen setup used in the GBA versions definitely functions for Ace Attorney, but it's a bit more cluttered than on the DS, and I think it just feels a bit more natural there. There are also a few more minor differences in this version, like this little finger wag animation that got removed starting with the third game's GBA version and carried over to the re-releases of the first and second games, as well as the speech bubbles being on the side of the screen depending on who's talking instead of the center, and they also play this little UI animation whenever Phoenix says take that with whatever he's presenting, which got removed in all later versions, with the exception of one scene in Justice for All, which, yeah, sure, why not. Aside from that, yeah, that's Ace Attorney, but on the GBA. Crazy. Oh yeah, and as for the second and third games, I just have a few quick notes, nothing super big. First of all, like I mentioned before, the GBA versions of these games use much lower quality versions of the music that pale in comparison to the DS versions. The GBA versions of all three games' OSTs were released in 2004 as soundtrack CDs and were included when Ace Attorney's soundtrack started to be included in streaming services like Spotify. I don't really see why you would listen to these over the higher quality versions, but I'd rather have these soundtracks available than not at all. You can listen to the higher quality versions on Spotify though, right? Right? No. So here's the thing, the DS version of the first game's OST is on streaming. However, the second and third game's soundtracks are only available in their original GBA format. Why? I don't know if the person at Capcom in charge of putting the soundtracks on Spotify just didn't know there was a difference between the GBA and new versions of the OSTs, or if there was some licensing issue with the newer versions, but regardless, ugh. There is one grace to this though, and it's that the third game's soundtrack has some really great remixes of the music on its second disc. Also, you could just import the tracks you want in high quality as local files on Spotify, something I didn't know you could do until recently. Every Ace Attorney game was first released on portable systems, before nearly all of them were eventually ported to modern home systems. Your time will come late in crossover. The first home console to be graced with Ace Attorney was actually the Wii, but not as a physical release. The Phoenix Wright trilogy was released in early 2010 for the Wii exclusively as WiiWare on the Wii Shop channel. And since the shop channel has been closed since 2019, you unfortunately can no longer get the Wii versions of Ace Attorney. legitimately. When I first heard about the Wii version, I figured that it would be based on the GBA version, since like that version, only one screen is used. That is not the case. So here's the thing, this isn't a remake of Ace Attorney for the Wii. This is a direct port of the DS version with the UI elements moved to the top screen, with the exception of the title screen where they don't even try to hide it. The translation from DS to Wii feels incredibly haphazard. I mean, the game isn't even in full screen. I think it has something to do with safe zones and overscan, but I can make a stink about it, so I'm going to. I mean, at least an option to increase the screen size would be appreciated. Actually, on second thought, maybe they didn't need to enlarge it at all, because this game doesn't look good blown up on a TV. The original DS has a screen resolution of 192p. The Wii outputs 480p, and Capcom, yeah, looking at you Kenzo Sugimoto, didn't do anything to make these sprites look good on a larger display. I think the sprites for the DS version look great on the DS screen, but when they're presented unedited like this, no. Now, the Wii version is on, of course, the Wii, so naturally, this version takes advantage of the Wii Remote's unique hardware to make the lawyer experience infinitely more immersive. And how does it do that? To present evidence, you point the Wii Remote like you're Phoenix Wright. Why? This is, pun unintended, completely pointless. The voice clips do come in through the Wiimote though, which is admittedly kinda cool, as bit crushed as they are. But Harry! What? Didn't you say the gimmicks in the DS version were fun? Yes, I did say that, but that actually added something though, and were unique minigames that broke up the typical point-and-click investigation sections and made them more interesting. What does this add? It's ultimately very inconsequential, but I don't know, I just don't get it. Thankfully, the devs realized this is completely unnecessary and also let you present evidence by pressing minus, so thanks. Thanks for letting me push the little button on my white stick controller. Now, if they wanted to Wii-ify the game in a way that made the experience better, they could have let you use the Wii Remote's IR pointer to let you investigate crime scenes faster. No, D-pad only. Okay, sure. There is one element of the game that's superior to the DS version, and that's that it doesn't use the GBA or DS versions of the soundtrack. While the DS soundtrack is far superior to the GBA version, it still has a little bit of DS artifactness to it, and you can tell if you listen to it with headphones. The Wii version, however, uses higher quality versions of the music with better instrument samples and more audio tracks. The higher quality soundtracks were also released physically via the Ace Attorney Soundbox in Japan. Why isn't this on Spotify? Nowadays, if you want to play Ace Attorney on PC, you can just buy the trilogy on Steam, but even as early as 2005, there were ways to play it on desktop, and no, I'm not talking about Dream GBA. In 2005, Source Next, a Japanese software publisher, released a port of the GBA version of Ace Attorney to Japanese PCs, with the second and third games coming in 2006. These came out both in disc form and in digital distribution form, with the first case of the first game being a free demo, not the last time today we'll see that practice. Despite being released in close proximity to the DS version of the trilogy, these are direct ports of the GBA versions to the PC. And when I say direct, I mean direct as in they didn't even bother to change the button prompts. Might say to hit the A button, but in reality, you gotta hit the S key. This is incredibly weird, and I have no explanation for it. It's even weird because Phoenix here is saying something along the lines of, oh, I gotta hit the R button to present evidence, which just isn't true. Also, did you know playing a text-heavy game in a non-native language you barely know is difficult? Guess I best whip out the old translator app. Naruhodo-san is in trouble. Suzuki, take your clothes. This game's great. So before we had the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Trilogy on 3DS and later on all modern platforms, we had Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Trilogy HD, initially released for iOS devices in 2012. It got an Android release as well, but only in Japan for some reason. It's bad. First of all, the UI for this game looks real bad. It looks like a rough draft. It's functional enough, but in terms of appearance, the UI looks like it's from some Ace Attorney Flash game. The game itself looks okay. The sprite remakes look fine enough, but they do have these thick outlines which don't look very good, but again, they look fine. The issue I have with them is that they only look good in stills, because compared to the original games, most characters don't blink for some reason and also speak with fewer frames of animation. It also sounds really bad, well, at least in terms of majority. The first game uses music from the DS version, but Justice for All and Trials and Tribulations use the GBA soundtracks for some reason, and they also remove certain sound effects. I literally cannot think of any reason as to why this is. Did they just forget? Was the same person in charge of releasing the soundtracks on Spotify working on this game's audio? Even worse, the Ace Attorney Soundbox came out the same day to Trilogy HD came out in Japan. That's just fucking sad. If that wasn't enough, this version somehow manages to add typos. How is that even possible? Did someone at Capcom just like... So the game isn't exactly a looker or a sounder, but it probably at least plays well, right? What do you think the answer to that question is? If I'm asking it, what do you think I'm gonna say? It runs like trash. It is optimized horribly for iOS devices. There are a ton of bugs and glitches, it lags constantly. How is this approved? This isn't some random mobile game dev, this is Capcom. Let's do a comparison between the original and iOS versions of a certain scene, and it's not a spoiler, don't worry. First, let's take a look at the DS version of the intro for the 5th case of the game, Rise from the Ashes, in full. What a good intro. The use of 3D models is great, the transitions are really cool, I like the it's great. Now let's take a look at the iOS version. You've outdone yourself, Capcom. You managed to take a piece of hardware much more powerful than the console these games initially released on and somehow made them worse. That's a task I didn't know was possible. The footage I'm showing you isn't even the worst of it, by the way. The worst examples of the game running badly are actually spoilers that I don't want to subject you to, but if you already know the story or just don't care, I've linked a compilation I made of some of the worst examples in the description with a few annotations. Enjoy. Speaking of footage, huge thanks to Sime for the footage I've been using. This game was actually delisted from the App Store in 2022 and replaced with the newer version of the trilogy, making it pretty much inaccessible nowadays. The new mobile version is infinitely better. It looks better, runs better, has better UI. Thank goodness they did this. There were also re-releases of Apollo Justice, Ace Attorney, the 3DS entries, Ace Attorney Investigations, and exclusively in Japan, the Great Ace Attorney Duology, and Ace Attorney Investigations 2. These are much better than the original trilogy release, despite being released in fairly close proximity to them. I don't know what was going on with the initial release of the trilogy, but good riddance. But while I was researching Ace Attorney ports, I discovered that there was another port released in 2009 for iOS a few years before this one. This one is based off the DS version and retains the dual screen style of the original, so automatically it's far superior to what we just went over. Now, despite me being able to find the file for this game online, I'm unable to record any footage of it since there's currently no iOS emulator that supports it, nor do I have a jailbroken iOS device that would let me install it. And I wasn't able to find any uploads of footage of this version online, so unfortunately, these screenshots are all we have to go off of. Yep, that's Ace Attorney. We're not done with mobile devices though, but this time we're not talking about a modern smartphone port. This is a port of Ace Attorney to Java game compatible phones, so pretty old phones nowadays. By the way, I don't think my footage is 100% accurate to what the game originally looked like on old phones, according to some old videos. I think the emulator is missing some graphical effects or had some settings set weird. I mean, my legitimate Nokia 3110 phone and copy of Ace Attorney, which I purchased from the Capcom World Service when I was a fetus. If you thought the iOS version was bad, this truly takes the cake. It's far more understandable here though, considering it's for hardware less powerful than the original and not the other way around. They had to make quite a few sacrifices to get it on Nokias. None of the character sprites are animated, so everyone just speaks without opening and closing their mouths. How lazy, who would do such a thing? The music is even worse in the GBA version. It uses a unique sound font that just sounds like a default Windows sound font or something, and this ain't it, Chief. A lot of music tracks are also missing. For example, Wright's Objection theme is just replaced with the Trial theme. A lot of music is also cut short or loops too soon. I'm not going to dock points for this version being bad because again, Nokia, it's understandable. Sadly, a good chunk of this version is actually lost media. It was available to purchase exclusively from the Capcom World Service, which, as you would assume, no longer exists. Oh yeah, remember how I said the first case of the first game being a free demo would be a recurring thing? Well, this is what I was talking about. The first Turnabout was a free demo from Capcom World. The cases were released separately, and in parts at that, so due to a combination of the release method and general obscurity of this version, only the first case and second part of the second case have been preserved. Aside from that, nada. Did you think we were done with mobile ports? Good one. Unlike the previous mobile ports, these ports remain Japan exclusive and were released for Japanese mobile phones known as Garakei or feature phones. The Phoenix Wright trilogy, as well as Apollo Justice and Ace Attorney Investigations, were released throughout the 2000s through services like iMode and EasyWeb. In addition to the mainline games, a whole bunch of exclusive spin-off games were released, like a poker and Hanafuda game, some quiz games, and this weird puzzle thing. Coming off of the pretty low quality J2ME port, I wasn't expecting these ports to be all that great, so imagine my surprise when I found out these are actually really good ports. The character sprites are animated, all the sound effects are here, they were able to include the 3D modeled sections, and in a huge improvement from the Java version, the music and sound fonts are actually really great. But again, the struggle of preserving old mobile games rears its ugly head, and as of now, at least from what I can tell, only the first case of the first game and the first case of Apollo Justice have been preserved. That's because they actually came pre-installed on some Japanese phones as demos, making them much easier to access. Hopefully in the future we'll come across some more of these games so they can be properly preserved. I'm actually really curious to see what the rest of the games look like, since what we already can see is really impressive. Need I remind you, these are 20-year-old phones. We've certainly seen our fair share of weird ports today, between ones that a fair number of people played to more obscure and unknown releases. I wouldn't be surprised if you learned something new today. I don't know why I'm talking like this, we still have one more port to talk about. So here's the thing, when Ace Attorney went international, it came to 3 new regions, North America, Australia, and Europe. It did not, however, release in South Korea, despite the DS being released and fairly successful there. So how are our fellow South Koreans gonna play Ace Attorney? That's where Nexon Mobile comes into play. Nexon is a largely Korean video game developer, and in the mid to late 2000s, I think, they released ports of the original Ace Attorney trilogy for Korean cell phones. This version was also built off of Java, actually, and the translation was reused when the iOS version was released in Korea. The kicker? This version is completely lost media. Not partially lost like the J2ME version, not found with no available footage online like the old iOS version. No copy of this game has been archived. Only a few videos of it exist online. Most are just short clips of a few seconds each, with one being an abridged playthrough of Rise from the Ashes, cut down from around 8 hours to just an hour and a half. God, Rise from the Ashes has been coming up a lot today. Speaking of which, why don't we take this opportunity to look at one more version of the intro. I am so sorry. Actually, wait, no I'm not. At least it being severely compressed is understandable here. I assume whatever phone this is running on is the same amount of power as a raw onion infused with a Duracell. There's just something about this video that's so unnerving. The strange sound effects that were added in this version, playing over no music, the extremely low resolution, the strange sound font this version uses, it's enough to send at least a hint of a chill down your spine. The fact this exists at all is wild. Even wilder, it's somehow higher quality than the Western J2ME port. Yeah, it's still absolutely limited by the hardware. Every single time the sound effect plays, the music has to stop and then restart from the beginning. But the character sprites are actually animated here. There are a lot of weird differences here, but I'll just go over the ones I find the most interesting based on the video we have. One thing I noticed is that they used the 2004 Objection theme instead of the 2001 Objection theme, despite this being the first game, and Objection 2004 not being used until the third game, Trials and Tribulations. UI is, as standard for most of these ports, completely different compared to the original, and it looks weird. Why is the text box off-center in the court record? Is this a stylistic choice? What is wrong with you? Also, Rise from the Ashes uses 3D models so you can examine evidence in more detail. Obviously, this thing trying to load a 3D model is a recipe for... So instead, they use sprites at different angles of evidence, which makes sense. I don't think 2006 Nexon flip phones have Mode 7 chips. Anyway, like I said before, this version is completely lost nowadays. No archive site has it available, so take this as a call to action. Do you still have a Korean Nexon phone that you used in the mid to late 2000s and remember an Ace Attorney game being on there? Please, for the love of God, archive it. Alternatively, we could just buy as many old Korean phones as possible on eBay and hope one of them has the game on it. I'm stimulating the economy. What did you do today? My personal favorite version of the Phoenix Wright trilogy is the 3DS version. Sadly, because of the closure of the 3DS and Wii U eShops last year, you can't get that version in the US anymore. Legitimately. Do what you want. Like I said before, the dual screen setup is perfect for the style of game, and I think the visuals of this version are a nice balance between the original pixel art and HD trilogy artwork. This is the way I first played these games, and I got them for just $3 since Capcom was having a big sale at the end of the eShop's lifespan. But since you can't get this version anymore, I would just recommend the HD trilogy on modern platforms. It's constantly going on sale for around $10 too, so make sure to keep an eye out. As long as you don't play, I don't know, the old iOS version, you're gonna have a good time. Anyway, that's all. I really don't have much else to say. The Ace Attorney Investigations collection came out last month. That's pretty fun. I'm gonna start a GoFundMe so I can buy more Korean phones.